Welcome to Coffee with Trucentive, 30 minutes of incentive automation tips, tricks, and best practices. My name's Jim Meyer. I'll be your host for today. And for today's coffee, we're going to cover the incentive delivery process and how to use that process to increase response rates and build greater brand equity throughout your incentive program. Before we do get started, we respect your time. We'll keep this to 30 minutes or less. As always, our coffees are educational, and we do like to keep them current. So if you do have a suggestion for a future Coffee with Trucentive, please feel free to send a note to marketing@trucentive.com. Your questions are welcome. We'll get to as many as we can today. If we don't, we'll be sure and follow up. And we will send you a link to this recording to share with your colleagues early next week. For today's topics, we're going to cover why so many incentives go unclaimed and unused, how to craft effective incentive deliveries. We'll talk a little bit about the differences in incentive experiences, why reminders are important, and how you can include additional calls to action in your incentive programs. We'll wrap up with reporting a little bit of detail on how you can see what's gone on in your program and use that to build better programs in the future. Now, whether you're saying thank you or trying to entice action, incentives are a very powerful tool. And the reason they work is we want to use them as improving the presentation of our ask by adding value. And this is often an emotional decision. Movement usually is an allocation of someone's time now versus the future. We also don't want to forget about the fact that when somebody embarks on a relationship with regard to that ask, it's not just that initial time, it's the perceived future cost, and they're going to include that in their perception of whether they want to make that movement. So that does determine how much we want to use that incentive to entice them to take that movement. Of course, prospects should always have that existing need or interest. They should be an influencer or a decision maker. If they're not, we have the wrong target audience. And we should consider the value of that incentive based on the lifetime value of that relationship and what it's worth to have that relationship as opposed to just that one meeting. That said, incentives should not be the main reason for action. And if it is, we're probably getting either the wrong target audience or we're providing too great of an incentive. When you consider your incentive program, you may have many goals involved in that program, but there are two primary front-end goals that we're typically considering: balancing the ask and reward, as I just described, but also increasing your overall brand or personal equity throughout that process. And number two is where many programs fail miserably. And those incentives are configured so they have poor packaging design. They're not aligned with any of your other marketing materials. So if you're doing that today, delivering incentives, and they don't tie in with your HR or sales or other programs, you need to consider moving that direction. Two, they have ineffective delivery. That's the one and done approach, where you do a webinar, you have a survey, and you send out that one-shot incentive. Very often you're going to find, and we'll see in some of the statistics, that by sending reminders and continually putting that brand in front of that and that incentive in front of that recipient, you gain not only success in claiming that incentive, but you get that increased brand equity. And then finally, the poor recipient experience. This can make or break your program. If you have too many steps to retrieve that incentive, you make it too hard, you may do more damage than you do good in your incentive program. And then the other is offering way too many choices, and that can create paralysis. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Unclaimed incentives are an important topic when it relates to ROI. Digital eliminates much of this process, but it really comes down to the difference between unclaimed and unused incentives. Unclaimed means that they didn't actually claim an incentive. Now, this only works in the digital world, and it only works with companies like Trucentive that give you the ability to deliver an incentive and put an expiration on it. And this is when they didn't claim it, print it out, they didn't put it in their digital wallet. And you can automatically recoup those funds that went unclaimed, as opposed to unused. This is where they've actually claimed it or received it, but they didn't use it. 51% of all Americans have unclaimed or unused gift cards, and the average value is somewhere around $116, down from about $129 last year. Now, that said, these are primarily physical cards, not digital cards. And the reason they go unused is because they weren't the desired card. They didn't get a choice. Somebody just gave them a card. Maybe it didn't fit what they like to buy or the stores they like to go to, or it's not in their region, or they lost a card, they forgot a card. A lot of us have cards sitting somewhere in a desk drawer. Of those who have those unused gift cards, 95% say they would eventually use them. However, statistics show that only about 49% of them ever get used. So if you consider just that 51% and 49%, there's a large number of gift cards that never get used. And that, once again, is primarily because they are not digital cards. So why do incentives go unclaimed? Well, there's three primary reasons. One, delivery issues. The recipient leaves the company, gets caught in spam filters. That is one of the primary reasons you want to not only have a quality delivery platform, but you also want to send reminders. The second one is overchoice or overload. And this is a situation where you get paralysis, or the recipient gets paralysis because you gave them too many choices. Now, where on one hand, if you only give them one choice and it's not the right card, it's not a good thing. In this case, if they have too many choices, they don't make a choice and they never claim that card. In addition, one of the interesting notes about this is that if they do actually claim that card, they tend to be less satisfied because they had all these choices and they second guess themselves on whether or not that incentive was the right incentive to choose. And so it hurts the value of your overall incentive program. And the final reason is something called gift guilt. And this is not to be confused with guilt gifts, where people give gifts because they feel guilty about something. This is where you create an emotional state where somebody does something, the ask that you asked them to do, maybe it was a survey, maybe it was attend a webinar, whatever that might be, and they feel like they should have done it anyway. And therefore, when they receive the incentive, they don't actually claim it because they felt like they should have done it. The most typical case of this is when people do product feedback or product reviews. Even though it might be a fair amount of work, they're using your product and they're providing that feedback, and they feel like, I should have done this anyway. I'm helping myself in the long run, and therefore they feel guilty about it and don't claim that incentive. Now, the transition from physical to digital does improve user experience and increase the ROI of your program because it solves some of the most common problems, but it does still have some issues that you always want to consider with those unclaimed and unused incentives. Now, one of the benefits of digital is you have multiple opportunities to deliver. So you can continually add those reminders and make sure that your brand is continually in front of that individual. You can send them via multiple vehicles, email and SMS. You can give them choice so that they can pick the card that they really want. If it's coffee, it could be Starbucks versus Peet's, or Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts. It gives them that focus so that they will use that card. And the good news is that any unclaimed incentives are automatically delivered back, so you don't lose money on those incentives like you do with physical cards or services that don't allow you to get them back. Then we still have the issue of unused incentives. Now, this is also benefited by recipient choice because if they pick a card that they like, they're more likely to use it. If you give them the facility to automatically put it in a digital wallet or take a picture or print it, it's less likely to get lost or forgotten. And in the future, we're actually going to have the ability not only to see when somebody views an incentive and then ultimately claims that incentive, but also when they redeem it. So that'll be really exciting for sales and marketing teams, where they can follow up in a timely fashion after an incentive is actually used. When we talk about incentives and delivery, we also need to talk about some of the statistics. Whether we're sending that initial ask or the delivery of the incentive, we need to consider the overall environment, and that is the email and SMS environments. Email is crazy. There are 347 billion emails sent every day by 2022. Users today now receive about 126 emails a day. That's about 46,000 emails a year, or one every 12 minutes. So we're being bombarded. So it's important to make sure that that email gets delivered, it's done right, we follow the best practices. It's also important to consider that smartphones are the primary vehicle for viewing emails today. In addition to that, if you do have a poorly constructed or formatted email, 70% of mobile users are going to delete it in the first 3 seconds. So email is a tough nut to crack, and you need to make sure you're doing it really well to make sure that people receive that incentive and get that brand impression. Now, SMS is much better, and so as part of our programs, we might want to consider, how do we get more individuals to give us their phone numbers so that we can deliver their incentives? The good news is that a large percentage of individuals will give you their phone number and allow you to deliver your incentive there. Now, as long as you respect that, it may be a great thing because your sales team may also be able to use that phone number. But over 97% of people read all of their text messages. Text messages have a 30 times greater click-through rate than email, and people are getting very used to receiving text messages from businesses as long as they're respectful, and typically if they tend to lean more towards the operational type emails that you would receive, including delivering of incentives. As we develop our incentive strategies, we should always be incorporating the same principles we use in our marketing emails, and that is that they are trustworthy, we have recognizable senders, they're relevant. Now, incentive emails are typically always relevant, but you need to make sure that the messaging is relevant so that people understand why they're getting that email, that SMS message, what it's for, relate it back to the activity or the ask that drove that particular incentive. Make it personal. Always use that real reply address, including subject line. Consider a picture of the sender. So there's lots of things we can do to make sure that we're doing the same good practices we're doing in our marketing, sales, and HR emails. Remember that the value of your incentive program is not just the dollar value of that incentive. It also includes the impression you make in that delivery process, as well as the redemption experience. Once again, the redemption experience alone can kill the value that you work so hard for in this whole process. And that all ends up being that perceived value or the brand equity that you're going to gain from that program. Now, I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on some of the basic principles, just so that we can kind of flush them out a little bit more. Typical best practices always extend to sending your incentives. So whether you have a marketing look and feel, maybe your sales communications are slightly different, or it could be HR internally. You want to make sure that those designs tie so that when that recipient receives that incentive, it looks the same, it ties, you're still doing all the things that you would normally do, you're including that personalization, and you're leveraging all the work and all the things you've done in your organization to hone your brand strategy. If you're not delivering your incentives in the same way as the rest of your materials, you need to ask yourself why. Incentives also have some unique issues that senders should always consider. They tend to be very image rich, so you're going to want to do some things to cope with that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They also convey emotion, so you do need to choose your wording carefully. You're saying thank you, you're giving somebody something, and so instead of being more of a marketing approach to or sales approach to that email, you want to make sure that you really carefully choose your wording. The other issue is that terms like gift and gift card are common spam flags, and we'll need to address that as well. So with regard to building trust, it's pretty simple. You want to make sure that you ensure it's a recognizable sender in the from address. You want to make sure that they can tie that back to what they did for that incentive, the who, what, why, I did this, thank you, here's your incentive. You also want to make sure that you're following other typical email practices. For example, making sure that when they view that email, and if it's not displaying images, you still can identify the brand. So here's a good example on the right of Discover.org. They do a really good job. They have a banner, and if you're not showing images, you can still see it's Discover.org. A lot of companies fail to do this. They put a huge banner up at the top of their email or their incentives, and it's not easily identifiable, and very often a user will just pass that by. Also, consider putting full contact details in the footer of your email. Now, because you typically have a business relationship already with the individuals that you're sending to, it's not absolutely legally necessary for canned spam laws and things of that nature, but it really does help build that trust. It is your incentive. It should be your domain. It should be your email. Personalization is really important, and it is a two-way street. It is all about personalization to the recipient or for the recipient. You want to make it personal, you want to engage, build that relationship, but it also should be personalized from the sender. And if you are not sending from your domain, it's really hard to look personal. Email authentication is where you actually give other servers like TrueCentive the ability to send on your behalf, and it is coming from your domain's email addresses. These SPF and DKIM records are part of being a good email citizen. They improve deliverability, and that's how you actually would be doing it with either your marketing automation or your email platform you're using inside your organization. It's really hard, once again, to look personal if it's not coming from your domain. You might even consider getting personal all the way down to the salesperson or whoever's engaging specifically with that individual and deliver the incentive from them. The good news is incentives have very high click-through rates, so you don't have to worry about them negatively impacting your domain. You have a relationship with that individual, you're sending them an incentive, it's a nice thing, and therefore, unlike when you are doing email or your marketing automation platform where you might put it on a subdomain or another domain, you can put incentives on your primary domain. Here's just a couple tips that we often forget. Once again, stay on brand, that's easy. Another one, big fonts are not clunky. You'll find a lot of marketers are still running with very small fonts. 16-point or better, I recommend 20-point fonts. They look great on desktop, and if your platform is delivering truly responsive emails to mobile, they will look good no matter what. Bigger buttons, we got big thumbs, we're typically on our phone. Make sure your buttons are sizable so that they can answer those calls to action. You can add additional calls to action, those work great. One other trend that's been happening lately is companies are adding navigation to their emails, like their website navigation. I'd highly recommend against it. It's noisy, and if you are putting that navigation in, you're drawing their attention away from the calls to action that you have in that email. If they're not answering those calls to action, we need to change those and refine those so that they work better. Only add video to landing pages. Even though HTML5 gives you the ability to put video in your emails, it's not a good practice. They're big, they're bulky. Put that on the landing page when people retrieve their incentive. Of course, personalization once again, and then subject lines. Short lines tend to work better, keeping them pithy. And don't forget, you might want to add personalization to the subject line with insertion tags if you have that data available on those records. Delivery content is primarily about spam and brand equity. Just make sure you consider both. Spam words, gift, free, gift card, we've learned those over the years. You can accommodate these in several ways. Complimentary. You can include subject lines in images, so the image contains the actual gift card message, but it's pretty easy to work around these. No screaming, all caps. Make sure your HTML is not just one big image like we see lots of retailers doing. It doesn't work very well for deliverability to businesses. Also, make sure that you have good contrast with the background. A lot of spam filters are now looking at this because people are trying to hide additional text in backgrounds and things like that. Grammar, noted. Also, incentives tend to have more images, so it's always good to have a good balance of text and images, and there's some tricks you can use to solve that. An easy solution, for example, is add a company background at the bottom of your delivery. It's unnecessary from a marketing standpoint, but it does help you with deliverability. Other things, make sure you add alt tags to all your images. Spammers don't do that because they're lazy, and it's one way just to get into the inbox in the right position. Just a little bit on themes. You want to give choice, but you want to keep it, once again, contained. So you can have a lot of variety of different themes in your presentation. We have companies doing sporting themes. We have tech themes. There's all kinds of options where you can mix and match and let the recipient choose the card of their choice. It's especially important if there are regional cards included in your mix, if there are international cards included in your mix, and or if you're doing something like a lunch and learn where they might already have an app on their phone. In this case, we have an incentive that's delivered, and it's a DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub. Well, if I already have DoorDash on my phone, I really don't want to have to sign up for Uber Eats, put my credit card, and go through that whole process. I can just go ahead and pick the DoorDash card. The value is all the same, gives me the same opportunity, and I can stick with my vendor of choice. I already have my restaurants I like, so it just makes life a lot easier. Reminders are a great tool for several reasons. One, they will improve the redemption of your incentives because you continually get that opportunity to offer it just in case they missed it. The other thing is you can mix it up. In this case, the reminders are all very similar, slight change on the buttons a little farther out, but by providing those reminders, you can reinforce your brand to the recipient. You're doing something nice, so keep tying that brand to that delivery of that incentive. And reminders can go beyond just the process of when an incentive is delivered. We actually will deliver the reminders up until the individual claims that incentive. However, we also can send an additional quote reminder when somebody claims their incentive. And that's a great opportunity to add a call to action that is in addition to claiming their incentive. And by doing that, you're asking for something additional, and you can get more mileage out of that incentive exactly at the point where they're redeeming that incentive or right after they've redeemed that incentive, and they're happy and they're in the best mood that you're probably going to get them in with regard to asking for more. Here's just some quick statistics on sending incentives with reminders and without reminders. And you can see the redemption rates go up dramatically if you send up to 2 reminders in a 60-day period. So this really brings value across the board with regard to redemption and continually putting your brand in front of that recipient. Here is an example of a secondary call to action. This is on the landing page. You can actually have secondary call to actions in the emails as well if you choose. So if that's that email after they've claimed the incentive, you might want to put one there as well. At the bottom, we see our primary call to action is, let's take our incentive. We have our recipient choice, they get to choose the incentive. And then above, we have the secondary call to action is give me feedback on how well we conducted the survey. And so by giving you this ability to have this secondary call to action, you can get more mileage out of the incentive you provided and, preferably the next step in the sales process. Now, making redemption easy is really important because this can make or break your program. Here's just a quick example of that particular redemption process. Here, the individual is choosing an Apple card, hitting confirm, and the card is being delivered on the fly or in real time. That card is presented. It has all the information necessary to claim that card. The redemption instructions are available, and even the ability to print, including the logo, the messaging, everything associated with that incentive. So as you can see, it was as simple as getting to the landing page and going ahead and claiming that incentive. Now, they didn't do the survey feedback, but that's an additional call to action beyond the normal redemption process. Either way, you're making it very easy for that individual to claim that incentive. Here is actually a real world incentive process by one of the popular incentive companies. And this is a company that doesn't actually charge you to send the incentive, but they keep the breakage. They keep all the ones that don't get claimed. So you might wonder whether or not they're actually trying to make it hard so that those incentives don't get claimed. The initial email is very simple. It can't be stylized to match your identity. It takes you to a landing page to go ahead and redeem. Once again, very simple, very basic. Then it takes you to another landing page to actually get the incentive that was delivered, which then again, another landing page that tells you that they're going to send you another email so that you can claim the gift card that they already delivered to you. And that email comes in with another button to take you to yet another landing page with another button to ultimately get to a landing page with your incentive. It's a pretty painful process. And once again, this is a company that sends your incentives for free, and it's always a challenge to consider a company that its best interest is in not having your recipient redeem their incentive. Incentive timing. This is pretty simple. We've talked about this several times in general, and it does depend on the type of ask that you have and the amount, of course, but post-response incentives are typically the most effective, and that's where somebody receives an incentive for doing something, attending a webinar, taking a survey. Pretty simple, that's what most of us do. There are some programs that use a time-based compensation that provides a time period for a higher value incentive, and that can increase early response rates, but it doesn't generally increase the overall response rates over the term of the program as you drop down to the lower incentive. There's also the option of having a pre-incentive on the front end with a post-incentive on the back end. A lot of companies were trying this a few years ago. It really does not work any better than a post-incentive alone. One of the features that TrueCentive has is gated or locked incentives, where there's a code to unlock a live incentive that's been sent to an individual. There's no real research on this yet, but we are showing that our customers that use these in trade shows and meeting incentives see about a 14% better meeting or attendance rate. So it does look like it does work well. These can be used for a variety of different applications, so it's just really up to you on whether you want to try that. And sweepstakes, they just don't work. All the statistics show that providing sweepstakes, they show no better response rates than offering no incentive at all. Here's just a quick list of popular gift cards. Just from a perspective standpoint, statistics are only available on all deliveries, and that includes physical in-store, which is a predominant or the dominant share. So what I recommend is using these cards as anchor cards in your theme that you're running, and use those to determine the baseline and wrap them in other choices that might be appropriate. Finally, reporting. Understanding what's going on in your program is critical to building a new program. And if you see you're having poor deliveries or poor views, poor claims, we want to know exactly what's going on at every step of our program. And so at any moment, you should understand how your program's performing, and you can change a program at any time. You can change the call to action, you can change the button colors, you can change the look and feel to see if you can improve that program's performance over time. So always make sure that you're watching this as you launch your program, as more attendees join the program, to see that you are achieving your goals and driving your overall incentive delivery to the desired customers, and making sure that you are continually driving that brand value. Well, that's all the time we have today. I apologize, we did run a little long, so we're not going to have time for questions. We do have a lot in the question box, so I'll make sure that we do follow up with all questions before the end of the week. Hope you have a great day. We look forward to seeing you in the next Coffee with TrueCentive. Thanks for joining us, and see you soon.